This video deals with monopolistic competition. Now, this is dealt with in the area of economics. This is the study in the subject area of economics. And as far as we're concerned on this course, that is considered mostly in the business environment module, but also in later modules. But it's important, before you undertake the study of this particular video, that you are clear and have clear understanding of two previous, or if you like, prerequisite models, those of perfect competition and profit maximization. Now, if you have forgotten about those models, it may be appropriate to turn off this video and go back and check material on perfect competition and profit maximization, and make sure you're clear about both of those models before you attempt this particular one. So those are really prerequisites. They're important, and they should be fully understood before you undertake this particular study, this particular video, because I'm going to talk about those models, and I'll assume that they have been covered and understood from previous material. So, assuming you're still here, and assuming you have not left now to study those other models, that you are perfectly happy to continue, then let's move on and talk about monopolistic competition. Well, for a start, it's almost the same as perfect competition, except the product is slightly differentiated. So it really is very similar to perfect competition. The only compromise it makes, in a sense, with the real world is that it allows for slightly differentiated products. Now, these products may be differentiated physically. They could look slightly different or have slightly different dimensions. They could be physically different, or there could be differences caused by psychic differentiation, caused by psychological issues. For example, differences created in the minds of the consumer due to, let's say, repetitive advertising attempting to establish a brand name and differentiate the product in the mind of the consumer. The product is in fact the same as the other products, but the consumers are led to believe that somehow it's more desirable. And that would be psychological or psychic differentiation. So there are two types of differentiation we can imagine: physical and psychological. Now let's have a look at the assumptions for perfect competition, because all of these assumptions apply in the context of monopolistic competition, except for this idea of a differentiated product. So let's look at the other assumptions in the model. Well, with perfect competition we have a homogeneous product. In other words, all the products are identical. So they're all exactly the same. So the consumer cannot discriminate between the output of one company and the next on the basis of differences in the product. All the products are homogeneous. They are all the same. It's assumed that there's no transport cost, that the products can be anywhere, but there's no cost in going to get them, or it's not very realistic, the assumption, but that doesn't matter. It's the model that's useful, that gives us the insight. The perfectly competitive model gives an insight into the starting of the operations of markets, and that's why we study this very strange model, this very, if you like, unrealistic model. It assumes perfect competition, perfect information, I should say. It assumes perfect information. We don't have perfect information, but we'll assume that the customers in this market situation have perfect information. Not very realistic, but it enables the model to work. We also say there's freedom to enter and exit the industry, that there are no barriers to entry or exit. Companies may come in very easily or leave very easily. It's almost a costless activity. They may come in, they may leave. So if there's large profits in the industry, then companies can easily come in. There's no way of stopping the companies coming in. Plus, of course, they have perfect information. They know that there is large profits. And they come in and produce an identical good to the one already being produced and share the profits. In fact, the profits will be competed down to zero in this model. Now, the assumptions of perfect competition and those of monopolistic competition are essentially the same, except, as I said, here we've got, with monopolistic competition, we've got a heterogeneous product. Not a homogeneous one, a heterogeneous one. So it's a different product. It's differentiated with monopolistic competition. Now, as mentioned before, the types of differentiation, but just to look over those again, we could have style changes. That would differentiate the product, where let's say one producer made slight differences to the product, changed the product slightly and put it on the market. That would be a style change, and that would differentiate the product. In essence, the product is the same, it's just a small change perhaps. Could be it changes the brand name. That would lead to be seen in the mind of the customer as perhaps a difference, and it may influence purchases of the product. It's still essentially the same product, it's just a slight difference. Change the trademark. The product in a sense remains the same all the time, it's just these are very cosmetic changes, very small changes, but they may lead to some sort of differentiation. There could be some quality differences, maybe perhaps the perception of quality in the mind of the consumer, which may lead to some differences in their approach to buying the product. Customer loyalty from repetitive advertising, well, that could create a difference. The people believe the product is different. It's actually not different, but they believe it's different because of repetitive advertising. So that's a possibility as well. Advertising can be two types. It can be informative advertising, telling the customer about the technical nature of the product, what the product is made from, the durability, its technical dimensions and attributes. That type of advertising is seen as quite boring advertising for commercial products, for consumer products. Oddly enough, that type of advertising tends to be important in the secondary sector, in the manufacturing sector of the economy, where people are buying machines. They're not too worried about the aesthetics of the machine, they're more worried about its technicalities and what it can do and what it can't do and what are its dimensions and so on. So that type of informative advertising is important in that area. The only real time we get it amongst consumer products is when the consumer product is quite expensive. For example, if we're buying a car, we can look up the specifications for the car, the engine size and the different components that are in the car. Or if you're buying a piece of white kitchenware, perhaps a washing machine, it might talk about different aspects of the washing machine. But by and large, this type of informative advertising does not happen in the consumer product markets. It's more to do with image, persuasive advertising, trying to get people to believe if they buy the product it will enhance their image. So they're trying to persuade them to buy the product. But these are some of the ways in which we can imagine product differentiation to take place. This is the way it could happen. We could differentiate products in those various ways. Now, let's look at a diagram. Here's the demand curve, DD, and we see this particular demand curve is horizontal. It's the individual firm's demand curve under perfect competition. So if you think back to the model on perfect competition, demand curves were horizontal. So the price was fixed, and the producers were price takers. They were not price makers, that to take the price in the market. And that happened because there's such a large number of producers, all making a homogeneous good, all with perfect information. So the individual producers didn't have any power. They simply took the price in the market. Now, if there is some differentiation, we can imagine the demand curve to have a very slight gradient like this. There is some opportunity for the companies to increase the price because the product is slightly different, or perhaps reduce the price and try and get extra sales. But by and large, they could increase the price because the product is slightly different. So perhaps under monopolistic competition, the demand curve could be seen as D1, D1. Slightly different. So let's take the demand curve to be D1, D1. Here I've exaggerated the slope of the demand curve, but let's say that's the demand curve under monopolistic competition. In a sense, that's the average revenue curve. And if that's the average revenue curve, then the marginal revenue curve has twice the gradient if the average revenue curve is a straight line. So the marginal revenue curve now has twice the gradient of the average revenue curve, so it would appear like I've drawn it there. Now if we insert in the average cost and marginal costs, we'll get a picture like this. So now the company, the firm, is starting to appear on the diagram. We've got costs and revenue on the diagram. And don't forget, all the companies in the market will have the same cost structure, essentially. They're all identical, producing more or less identical goods, very slightly different. That's why the demand curve was slightly downward sloping. Now here we've got a situation where marginal cost cuts marginal revenue. Marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue at one point, and the marginal cost curve is upward sloping. So that is the point of profit maximization. Marginal revenue equals marginal cost, and we've got QMC. That's the quantity under monopolistic competition, QMC. And you can see in this case that the company is making what we call abnormal profits. They're making large profits. So the company has differentiated its product. Now it's making significant profits. The red area indicates the profits. Now if these are called, excess profits. Now this leads to the demand curve shifting downwards, because more companies enter the market. The excess profits are a signal for companies to enter the market, and it's easy for companies to enter the market. It's one of our assumptions. So we can see that the excess profits have been squeezed because more companies are now producing. The company is still, our representative company here is still profit maximizing, marginal revenue equals marginal cost, but it's just getting less profit because there are now more companies in the market. And if the companies still see excess profit, they will still want to enter the market until finally the demand curve is just tangential to the average cost curve. And that's also the point of profit maximization. It's actually break even and profit maximization. In other words, this company has to profit maximize in order to break even. The two things coincide. If the company does not profit maximize, it will lose. It'll have to exit the market. So it's been forced to be efficient. So now we've got the the price under monopolistic competition, PMC, and the quantity, QMC, the quantity under monopolistic competition. And what we've got here is that this company must profit maximize just to survive. So the long-run equilibrium under conditions of monopolistic competition are as represented on that diagram. If we inserted PPC, that's the price under perfect competition. Well, under perfect competition, the demand curve and the average revenue curve is just a horizontal line. And in fact, under long-run conditions of perfect competition, it'll just be tangential to the average cost curve at the minimum point of the average cost curve. So now we have a contrast between PMC, the price under monopolistic competition, and the price under perfect competition, which is horizontal, as we can see. And we can also see, by just looking at the diagram, that the price under monopolistic competition is higher. It's also the case if we look at the quantities. The quantity under monopolistic competition is less, QMC is less than the quantity under perfect competition, QPC. So, under monopolistic competition, the consumer would pay more and get less. And therefore, monopolistic competition is inferior to perfect competition. But I suppose that's almost saying the obvious, because perfect competition must be perfect. It's perfect competition. So monopolistic competition, which is illustrated here by the diagram, monopolistic competition is worse for the consumer. The consumer pays more for the product and gets less. However, we must bear in mind that the consumer here is getting a differentiated product. All the products are different. So the consumer may enjoy the fact that there are different products, because as humans we like different products. We don't want everything to be the same. That's boring. So we have different products, but we have to pay more for the privilege, if you like, of having different products, and we also get less of them. So the marginal revenue under monopolistic competition is equal to the marginal cost. That's the point that's indicated with the arrow here. And if we take that up and take it down, it determines the quantity under monopolistic competition and the price under monopolistic competition. And under perfect competition, the marginal revenue is equal to the marginal cost, and that's the minimum point of the average cost curve, as we said earlier. So now we've got the conclusion that the price under monopolistic competition is more than under perfect competition, and the quantity is less. And as I said, that should not surprise us, because we're comparing monopolistic competition with perfect competition, and of course perfect competition must be the best. It's perfect. But that's been cynical to some extent. We can see why the price is higher and the quantity is less, because of the differentiated product. We have to pay for the privilege of having that differentiation. And the long run equilibrium, well, the long run equilibrium, if we go back to the previous diagram, we see that the demand curve under monopolistic competition is D1, D1, and it's downward sloping, but the degree of difference will erode over time. The companies under monopolistic competition will start to copy each other for all sorts of reasons. They will share the technology, they will understand how to make the product, and they will see what is selling in the market. The suppliers of raw materials will supply essentially the same materials, the products will start to become the same. So eventually monopolistic competition will become perfect competition, and that's the way it will emerge over a long period of time. In the interim period, we could say that's a point of equilibrium, a long run equilibrium, but if you like, this one here could be a very long run equilibrium where the differences may be eroded over time and monopolistic competition sort of fades into perfect competition. And that's it. That's what we've set out to discuss. We've discussed in the video monopolistic competition, what it's meant, differentiation. We've compared it with perfect competition. We've seen that the price is higher and the quantity is less under monopolistic competition, but the consumer gets a differentiated product. And that's all we're going to deal with in this video. So let's leave it at that and say thank you for watching.